Bulavanaka, and a very welcome to all of you joining us today for the UN Ocean Decade Pacific Satellite event. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the presence of the Director General of the Pacific Community joining us from Naumea, Dr. Stuart Mitchin. Thank you very much for being with us. My name is Amalia Rigsby, and I'll be your moderator for today. And on behalf of the Pacific Community SPC, we'd like to welcome you on board our Vaka Moana, a virtual voyaging canoe for today's event on an accessible Pacific Ocean. Now, before we begin today's program, just a reminder to our attendees that your mics have been switched off and that only our panelists have speaking rights. However, should you wish to contribute to the conversation via an observation, or if you have a question, please type it into the chat. Now, I believe it was beloved poet and scholar Teresia Tewa who once said, "We sweat and cry salt water, so we know that the ocean is really in our blood." It's not surprising when you think about it, especially when you take into consideration the size of the Blue Pacific continent, which measures the same size as Africa. Our Blue Pacific region alone is 98% ocean, and Pacific Islanders custodians of 20% of the world's exclusive economic zones with the healthiest tuna stocks globally. This is why it is so critical that we have improved access to marine data and knowledge to support good governance, management, innovation, and decision-making, which will enable everyone to understand the actions we need to take for the ocean that we want. Now, today we will explore how Pacific Islanders are overcoming barriers to improve access to ocean information and knowledge. These barriers include barriers to data management, to connectivity, to understanding, to contribution, and to application. Now, during the course of this discussion, we'd like to encourage you to participate. So as I mentioned before, if you have a question or an observation for our speakers, please feel free to share it in the comments or chat section for inclusion in our discussion. Now, with that being said, please make yourself comfortable as we begin our virtual voyage on our Vaka Moana. We want to take you on a journey, a symbolic journey aboard a Vaka, much like the ones that the Pacific forefathers used to travel the vast Pacific Ocean. Now, as we hear from our panelists, we will use the areas that they work on to build our virtual Vaka Moana from the hull to the sail. But before we embark on this journey, as is custom when it comes to events and programs of importance, we ask the ordained minister of the United Church Solomon Islands, Reverend Sierra Bird, to bless today's proceedings.
As you begin your virtual talanoa, focusing on ways to build Vaka Moana as the data visualization tools for an accessible Pacific Ocean, I invite you to join me in a time of reflection and prayer. Let us pray. Creator and creating God, we invite you to be present in our midst as we gather in this virtual space. Amen. Let me share some faith insights that are interwoven with my own story and that connect to the work that you are doing for God's creation, the ocean. The creation story in Genesis 1 says that God separated the water below the sky to come together in one place so that the land will appear, which God named earth. And the water which had come together, God named sea. These biblical accounts tell us that God called into existence all kinds of sea creatures, and God was very pleased. The two humans in the story were given access to that which God had created. I come from Babanga, a tiny atoll island in the western province of the Solomon Islands. The cross-sections of the islands where my home stands is no more than 100 meters wide. As such, the sea is our front yard and our backyard. This very narrow stretch of sand is my home, sandwiched by the ocean on both sides. This is my particular place in our island sea of islands. Thus, from my formative years, access to the Moana or sea was both beneficial and challenging. My well-being and livelihood and that of my family were interwoven with the seas and ocean. As such, please join me and let us enter into the doxology and laments for our seas and oceans. O our blue Pacific Ocean, our sea of islands, we acknowledge and celebrate together the undeniable and yet uncomfortable truth that our life and well-being are delicately interwoven with your own life and well-being. We remember and appreciate that ocean makes up 98% of our blue Pacific region. We acknowledge that 70% of our planet is water. Oh, our blue Pacific. Even our very bodily existence is nothing without you. We acknowledge that 60% of an adult body weight is water, and 80% of a child's body weight is also water. Moreover, our blue Pacific, 80% of the oxygen that goes through our lungs is generated from your blue lungs. Our daily subsistence and livelihood can neither be described nor understood apart from you, our blue Pacific. And yet, we have failed so many times and in many ways to respect your own life and well-being. Through uncontrolled desires and hunger for more economical growth, we have sacrificed your integrity and your capacity to sustain both yourself and our human communities into the future. Through human-caused climate change, your temperature is somewhat heightened, thus changing global current flows and affecting multiple marine ecosystem and creatures. In turn, this affects our own life and well-being. Our blue Pacific, we have choked you with all kinds of pollutants. We are guilty of discharging 8 million metric tons of plastic into your womb every year, the womb that gives and supports life. We confess that these and more continue to limit and hinder our access and are barriers to our blue Pacific means of livelihood, well-being, and holistic progress. In closing, I invite us to return to the text in Genesis 1, and especially the first part of verse 26, where God said, let us. This let us is an invitation by God towards partnership, collaboration, and cooperation. In the creation of human beings, think about it, God opening up the opportunity and giving the invitation for such a partnership. This is a joy, privilege, honor, and yet a huge challenge and responsibility. This accessible Pacific Ocean event consists of stakeholders coming together and working in partnership. And as outlined in the concept note, such access is addressed through the removal of barriers, including barriers to management, barriers to connectivity, barriers to understanding, barriers to contributions, and barriers to applications. God's invitation, let us, is instructive for your discussions and deliberations. It is an invitation to solidarity and power sharing. It is an invitation to move from working in silos and competition towards working in team and cooperation. It is an invitation to let down one's guards and allow oneself a degree of vulnerability, a vulnerability that enables empathy and empowerment. It is an invitation to openness and transparency. It is an invitation to create together and to bring out new life and vitality. It is an invitation towards respectful, equal, and dignified relationship between women and men and children. An invitation to journey together towards possible new futures for our blue Pacific. The blessings, may the God of peace, justice, and wisdom guide, strengthen, and enlighten you all as you participate in the proceeding of our blue Pacific events. May the discussions and talanoas be positive and fruitful, and may the outcomes of this event fulfill the objectives and as such prove useful and beneficial for the countries and our people. Amen. Thank you.
Vinakavakalevu, Reverend Bird. Thank you very much. Now, before we begin, we want to hear from you. Today, we'll be using the Slido app and platform to host live polls and to ask you, our audience, questions. Now, to access the Slido platform, you can use your mobile phone or your web browser. Simply enter slido.com in the search bar of your preferred web browser. If you're using your phone, you can also scan the QR codes on the screen. A white bar will appear across the screen saying enter code here. If you're on a computer, you'll see a blue box saying joining as a participant, enter code here. The event code for today's lab is Access Ocean. Type this into the bar and you'll be redirected to the first question for today. We're asking everyone to let us know where you're tuning in from to join us for this virtual lab for an accessible ocean. As more of you join in and respond, we'll see more and more of your responses in the word cloud below. So thank you very much for joining us from New Caledonia. Bonjour. We also have people from Suva. Thank you very much, Fiji. Nisambulunaka. A very warm welcome as well, and Fakalova Atu to those joining in from Niue. Thank you very much. From Estonia as well. Thank you so much for being here for accessing Blue Oceans. We have people as well tuning in from, well, it's moving very fast. From New Zealand, Bulavanaka, thank you so much for being with us. And from Australia as well. It's always wonderful to have our brothers and sisters around the Pacific region joining us. And hopefully more people will join in as we go through the lab today. Now let's move on to a second Slido question. Have you participated in previous Vaka Moana Ocean Labs organized by SPC? Yes, no, I don't know. Yeah, it's wonderful to see so many people. Oh, half and half. All right. It's wonderful to see so many people coming back to join us for the Vaka Moana Ocean Labs that have been organized by SPC. It's also wonderful to see that people are kind of joining us for the first time. Thank you so very much. We hope to have you contributing to more of these conversations as and when they happen. Now, a third Slido question for this morning. Which of the following elements of an accessible ocean do you consider most important? And you're allowed to select up to 3. Data gathering and data management, connectivity in terms of internet, mobile phones, communications infrastructure, tailored communications and outreach, or it might be collaborative contribution to knowledge generations, or applications of data and knowledge to policy and action. It seems we have a bit of a tie for data gathering and data management, and application of data and knowledge to policy and action. It seems that most people are voting on data gathering and data management, and that's something that we'll be looking at closely today. Now, we'll return to Slido throughout the 2-hour lab today, so please keep the app open to continue to contribute. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, today's events and other events like this have been part of the UN Ocean Decade event, which have taken place on board a virtual Vaka Moana or ocean canoe. But why is it important? Why is it important that this event and events like this that surround our ocean take place on a Vaka? To answer that question, I'd like to do what countless Pacific Islanders have done before me to pass on messages, to pass on cultures and traditions that have been important to them. I'd like to tell you a story that will be told thanks to the help of visual artist Tui Lendua and musician and artist Calvin Rore and Nati Dolayasi. A story that starts on a beach with a village elder working in the late afternoon sun, patiently chipping away at the inside of what will eventually be a Vaka. As he works, he can hear the waves gently lapping at the shore, children playing in the distance, and all is well. His reverie is broken by a gentle tug on his sulu. Sighing, he looks down to see his ever-inquisitive grandchild looking at him with solemn eyes, his cousins standing behind him. Yes, he asks, what is it now? Grandfather, what is that? His grandchild asks, using his chin to point to the hull of the Vaka he has spent the last few weeks working on. This, my child, is a hull. But when it is completed, it will eventually be a Vaka, a boat that our ancestors used to travel all over the Pacific. Really, his grandchild asks, wrinkling his nose in disbelief. Yes, it is true. Our Vakas are built to withstand long journeys. They have to be. Because when our forefathers used to sail away from their villages in search of new lands, they weren't sure if the journey would take weeks or months. The Vaka wasn't just a boat, it was also a symbol of faith and hope. Hope that it would get you to where you needed to go, and for some that was a new promised land, and faith that all of the parts of the Vaka would work together to deliver you safely to your destination. I'd like to invite you to keep that image of a Vaka in mind as we navigate through today's event. As we hear from our panelists, we'll begin to slowly build our Vaka. It is with this symbol that we leave this speech with our small child and their grandfather to view a video on traditional knowledge databases.
Artuna sa ambay papalit yun na bira eh. Indo papalit bira sa ando senting ng tangilang magi. Iliw eh.
When they start to see turtles nesting higher up in the tree line or the sand dunes, it can indicate 3 or 4 months ahead of time that the cyclone season will be very active and in fact very severe. We are losing a lot of our knowledge, our living libraries, our elders are passing on, and this information has not even been collected. There's wealth and depth that we haven't even gone deeply into, and once this knowledge is lost, there's no way of getting it back.
So when it sprouts, the leaves sprouts upwards, and when it continues to curl upwards, it gives an indication that a tropical cyclone is on its way. We have worked with one of the NGO, non-government organization groups in the community, which is the Niue Girls and Boys Brigade, to also start this program in monitoring the yam, because we wanted to verify the stories or the information that had been passed on by our elders. We wanted to see if it is true or not.
For myself personally, I've seen how this project has elevated and provided validation of traditional knowledge as an important source of data that can be used in scientific research and information. It has also benefited our communities by allowing the intergenerational transfer of knowledge.
I think it's definitely very useful for the younger generation to learn both worlds, the scientific world and also the traditional knowledge world. The two coming together will make a very effective way of adapting to climate change.
Science gives you that bird's eye view of what is to come. It can predict, for example, where the cyclone track will be heading. But what traditional knowledge gives you is that downscale view of what the impacts will be based on stories that were passed on, as well as giving you coping mechanisms.
So it's very important to have this collaboration between the two and bring the two together. And that way we can have a more effective way of understanding how to respond to climate change within our own context or within our own needs.
Now, today's event focuses on removing barriers to accessibility of ocean information and highlighting critical elements of accessibility. Each of our panelists today will be speaking on areas they are experienced in and sharing with us how we can break down the barriers that are limiting us from sharing information that will make our ocean more accessible. With that being said, The last few decades have seen an explosion of data. Some would say more than we know what to do with. Ensuring this data is appropriately cataloged and stored is key to ensuring it be used and reused. To speak on barriers to management, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first two panelists. I'll introduce each of them and give them an opportunity to speak on to their areas of experience before we open up the floor for questions and discussions. To begin, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Sioweli Tonga, the Program Manager for the Pacific Data Hub, an open data initiative led by the Pacific Community, SPC. His role at SPC sits at the intersection of digital technology and international development. He is passionate about initiatives that seek to harness the potential of data and digital technologies to empower communities and inspire people to bring about positive change. Bulavanaka, Mr. Tonga, and welcome. Mr. Tong, I'd like to invite you to unmute yourself so that we can hear what you have to say.
Let me try that again. Bulavinaka, Amelia, and thank you for the kind introduction. And a warm hello and thank you to all of you who have joined us for this Talanoa discussion. I'm really intrigued and excited to unpack what it means to have an accessible ocean and to hear the perspectives and insights from my co-panelists. So for those of you who are not familiar with SPC, the Pacific Community, we provide scientific research and technical and policy advice to the governments of the Pacific Island countries and territories. SPC has served the Pacific for over 75 years and applying science and knowledge to tackle the region's most complex development, social, economic, and environmental challenges. And in doing this work, our organization has amassed an enormous collection of data and information. So I lead a small team and work with many other teams within SPC to manage this large collection of data and information, which we have gathered over many, many decades. And of course, a lot of this data is about the ocean. It's about ocean science and maritime activities. So I guess you can call the main product that my team is responsible for is this Pacific Data Hub. So what is this Pacific Data Hub, you might ask? And for me, it's three things, and I'll try to cover these things very briefly. First off, and this is what most people associate with the Pacific Data Hub, is that it is a data portal. It's a gateway to the most comprehensive range of data and information from the Pacific. This is the most visible part of our work. It's the digital technology platforms and the tools we provide to enhance access to the data and evidence that is needed by our members to inform better policy development and decision making. Secondly, it's a program of work which is about building capability in data management and data governance. And this is happening within our own organization and also in collaboration with our regional development partners and with our Pacific Island members. But data platforms on their own don't solve any problems. In fact, they create more problems for us if they're not managed well. There needs to be a continuous flow of timely and reliable data feeding into these data platforms. We need to have appropriate standards and mechanisms in place to enable data flows between systems, between organizations, teams, and people. And data needs to be continuously curated and contextualized. We need to have the governance structures and instruments in place to ensure there is trust and that data is well managed and protected. And thirdly, and this is what, this is somewhat aspirational, but for me is really at the core of what drives our approach within the Pacific Data Hub. We're a catalyst for change. We're an innovation outlet, and we are an enabler for digital transformation. The work we're doing is about shifting people's attitudes and thinking towards data, how we manage and how we govern our data resources, and how we can realize value from data for public good. We want to be able to harness and unleash the potential of data to be used and reused to effect positive change. So in summary, The work we're doing in the Pacific Data Program is about providing tools and digital platforms. It's also about building capability and in data management, in data governance, and it's about empowering people and giving them the confidence and knowledge to engage with data. And this to me really cuts to the essence of what is an accessible ocean, where data and information is readily available to inform how we interact with and how we manage our ocean resources. Vinaka, Amelia, back to you.
Thank you very much, Sio. Thank you very much for your presentation. I just wanted to ask you a question, and this is a question that was posed in the chat from Makalesi Ngonilevu, and she asked, can you specify what ocean data is accessible to the public, and where does it reside, and who do we contact?
So thanks for that question. It's quite a complex question. There are multiple sources of data and information. As you saw in the video, there's a huge wealth of data or knowledge and traditional knowledge held within our member countries. So with our elders, and there's a real challenge in unlocking that and preserving that knowledge and ensuring that it can continue to be shared for generations. There's a whole variety of different data types. Some of it can be freely shared. Some of it is quite sensitive and private, there are issues around privacy and commercial sensitivity that we need to be aware of, especially in fisheries data. I think that one of the challenges we have in the Pacific is establishing the right data governance approaches and frameworks and mechanisms to inform how we treat and manage different types of data to provide assurance and trust to different data stakeholders that data is being well managed and protected where it needs to be. But also data governance is about providing the frameworks to allow us to realize value from this data resource and knowledge. So the Pacific Data Hub is one of those sources of data, and I touched on this before. One of our goals is to try and improve access to data from the Pacific. So we're looking at pulling in different data resources, knowledge products, and make that accessible from one place, the Pacific Data Hub. Vinaka, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sio, and thank you very much, Makalesi, for your question. Don't forget that if you have an observation or if you have a question, that you can always drop it into the chat, and we'll try to get to it as soon as we can. Now, from management, we move to connectivity. Until we have improved communications infrastructure, things like cable, satellites, internet connectivity, etc., across the region, the tools and information we develop will have limited outreach. Connectivity is no longer a luxury, it is a necessity. To speak to us on barriers to connectivity, please welcome our second panelist for this event, Ruth Maitaela of Dignity Pacific. Ruth is a native Solomon Islander and social entrepreneur with more than 20 years of development experience in the Solomon Islands. She's the founder of Dignity Pacific, a Solomon Islands-based women-led research firm. Ruth has excellent local knowledge, an established network, and strongly believes in partnership and collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, Ruth.
Thank you, Amelia. Hello, everyone. As Amelia has mentioned already, my name is Ruth Maitala, and I'm connecting from Solomon Islands. I would like to begin by telling you the Dignity Pacific story. So this is a small firm that is working on research and research consultation. And we began in December 2018 when I started to see that my three teenagers who are high school leavers found it really hard to get a job. So I started by creating this job, to allow them to have a space to to be useful in the community and also in the country. So we started out as a family firm, but in the space of 2 years, we could no longer be a family-led firm or a family-based organization. So we have expanded to improve on a lot of our delivery services, policies, and staff. So our experience is based on our vision for providing quality data for development, but also applied traditional research methodologies and approaches to tackle some of the key challenges we experience in terms of governance, land and natural resources, designing and developing effective monitoring and evaluation frameworks for efficiency, relevancy, and sustainable in an environment which we live. Next slide, please. So as you can see, in Solomon Islands, we have more than 800,000 population, and 48% of that is women. We are geographically spread, and this presents a lot of geographical challenges, and cost of data collection is very high. We have 60 languages and 360 dialects. And for illiteracy, the highest rates are for women in Malay and Temotu provinces. And then we also agree that one size does not fit all. So we cannot find one approach that that can find a solution for data collection and access and connectivity in the Solomon Islands. Our role in data collection, we have a small team of young women, and I led up to about 50 enumerators at one time to do one survey. And because of COVID-19, we have went on to establish a call center, which can call us at one time. And so in Solomon Islands, we are the first private company to own a 24/7 call center, and second to telecom in using what they call the BBS system and telecom router to the Cambim phone system that enables IP calls to all provinces and globally. And this has helped us in three ways that I want to share with you. First, it cuts down on the logistics cost for Solomon Islands because it's very expensive, and the rural people can be connected by phone to everywhere that there is a telecom tower which connects them through mobile, through that network coverage. Secondly, with the establishment of our call center, we have explored new spaces important for data collection. We have to improve our confidentiality policies and statements, our non-disclosure agreements with telecom, who is providing us with numbers, and also the Ministry of Communications has now involved with us to shaping our own policies to protect and safeguard national information and intellectual property rights. So we have explored new areas in data collection, which we have never dreamt of before. And thirdly, the call center is only one aspect of data collection and management, which Dignity Pacific has embarked on. We are fully digitized with user-friendly equipment, including smartphones, tablets, 24/7 internet access. And this has opened up opportunities for youths and women to participate in data collection in all our 9 provinces, and involvement and engagement of women, single mothers, and retired moms has also helped to bridge the gap of technology savviness amongst women. And we are working closely with Strong and Business in Solomon Islands, which is a DFAT funded program that is supporting SMEs to strengthen businesses and to also strengthen our financial system. So it's not only looking out at data collection, data storage, data governance, but it's also our own governance in the Dignity Pacific as an organization and as a firm. In summary, our current network with government and NGOs has grown so much in the past 2 years. So far, we have employed hundreds of young men and women over the past 2 years to support them in paying for school fees, supporting livelihoods of single moms, widows, and female heads of households. We are excited about the change that we are leading, not only in Solomon Islands, but also in the Pacific region. We are continuing to strengthen our network with local organizations and other development agencies that we believe are making a big difference in our work in expanding and also in supporting other people going forward. One of the barriers that I want to highlight in this conference is for us as a small research firm, we struggle with qualified human resources. So when I started Dignity Pacific, my intention was to get my 3 teenagers and I opportunity to have employment. All 3 children were high school leavers, and finding a job for them here was not easy. So when I created this organization, I wanted to employ my children and give them um, an opportunity to earn something for them and their families. That approach went well for almost a year, and we were successful in delivering data collection and enumerated training activities in Solomon Islands and in Papua New Guinea. But it was short-lived because people started hearing about us, and then recently we got a contract with DFAT for the next 4 years, and which is now forcing us to align our recruitment policies, data management policies, etc., with the DFAT policies. So that's an area that we are finding as a huge barrier and a challenge. So we are also now at a place where we also need a legal advisor to work on our contracting policies and practices, our non-disclosure agreements, management of consultant contracts, and similar activities. So what I intended to be a family business is no longer relevant for today. So my children still have access to employment, but the interest to serve a wider community with our approach and our services becomes too big to be called a family business. That seems to be a barrier to hire the right people to deliver the work in a short space of time. So um, just on the last slide, Amelia, I just wanted to say uh, for us, creating partnerships is an opportunity and a way forward for ensuring that we have um, connectivity and access to information across the Pacific. I'd like to use the language in Gula Alam, my native language, which is called Rao Ofula. And it means working together to collect, store, and manage data in the way forward. And this should be our future, and this is our future for Dignity Pacific and the women and the youth for the Pacific Islands. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth, and thank you very much for the work that you do. I have a question for you, and it's you mentioned that you're a small research firm. Now, as a small research firm, and with the challenges with your geographical spread when it comes to collecting data, what are the implications of the disparity of connectivity for youth, for women especially, and also for remote communities?
Thank you, Amelia. I'm happy that you have asked that question because we were small when we started because I worked with my 3 children, and we never dreamed of giving the opportunity and privilege to other young people who might not have the same opportunity that my kids had. So when we first won our first contract that we won was in Rabaul in PNG. And I trained up to 30 young people to collect data for Red Cross International, and that was our beginning. So when I came back, we had a few more data collection opportunities to travel to several provinces. And then I didn't know who would lead teams, who is trained in data, who is experienced, who has the right match for which kind of job in the teams. And so I started out with my kids. So they were like my guinea pigs. So I had them as supervisors, I had them as data collectors, enumerators, and then we sort of collected their friends and friends of their friends. And then we started growing like that. And in the past 2 years, we have coordinated several different surveys that needed up to 50 enumerators at one time. And I found it's really challenging because I have to move big teams to different provinces, and it was proven very expensive. So this month, we have now just installed our first ever BBX phone system, which we are now calling on all youth volunteers who are available so that we can train them to use phones, smartphones, and different apps to collect data. And so we can cut off on some of the logistics costs to reach the provinces and to reach the very remote areas that has telecom coverage. So that's how we approached it. And now we are getting calls and emails from everywhere in the world. And we are so excited that we are small, women-led, youth engaged, and we are reaching out to the Pacific and the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. It's so wonderful to hear of the work that you're doing. Now, I have a question for the both of our panelists. So this is for both you, Ruth and Sio, and I invite the both of you to answer this together. One of the commonalities I found between the work that the both of you do is being able to access and share information on a national level, on a regional level. With the obstacles that you face, what would you say is your greatest strength?
I might go first then, if you don't mind, Ruth. I was really inspired by what you've shared about the work that you're doing, Ruth. And I think what really stood out for me is the partnership approach. And I think that is where that's one of the bright spots we're seeing, and where we think the future for us needs to focus on as well. It gives me hope to see this, that there's increased willingness of development agencies to collaborate and coordinate in our data management efforts. I'm seeing more and more organizations reaching out to us from both international, regional, and national organizations to work in partnership to develop complementary approaches to solving some of the common data management challenges. And this is something I'd like to encourage and nurture, building these partnerships and data, strengthening the ecosystem of data providers and data users to allow greater access to data and information about the ocean. I think we really can build better solutions when we're working together. We can ensure greater participation and inclusiveness when we work together, and we can make better decisions by sharing information and knowledge. And this, for me, is the future I want to nurture for an accessible ocean. Malo.
Ruth, would you like to answer that?
Thank you, Amelia. Thank you, Sio, and also thank you for that support. One of the greatest strengths for me is people. So it is not easy to do this work, and I find it really challenging when it is a woman who is leading, conversations, negotiations, and all these things to get contracts and to do all these things that I have never experienced before. But once I have people and once I have the network, I think this is the greatest strength. And that's why I brought out that concept of Ra'awafula. So it's joining hands together, working together, and going for the same goals and same targets. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And thank you so much, Siweli, for your time this morning. I couldn't agree more with your answers. When it comes to finding solutions, we need to work together and reminding ourselves that at the core of all of these things is people, Vinaka. Now, panelists have given us much to think about when it comes to breaking the barriers to both management and connectivity. Now, I want to take you back to the virtual Vaka, Vaka Moana, and invite you to imagine data management is the hull and connectivity is the sail. To explain how, we go back to our story of child and grandfather. When we left them, the grandfather had likened the Vaka to the symbols of faith and hope, and that all the parts would work together to deliver you to where you needed to go. It is here that we rejoin the story. The small child sitting down on the beach while watching his grandfather still at work asks him, "Grandfather, why are you working on the hull?" "Because, my child, without a hull, there can be no Vaka. This is the foundation to a strong boat. This is what all things will rest on during a long voyage: the sail, the oar, the people." The child, thinking on what his grandfather just said, thinks for a while and then asks, "Okay, but if you're working on the hull, then what are my mother and aunts working on?" The grandfather, nodding in comprehension, answers without stopping the work that he's doing on the Vaka. "That would be the sail. A hull can be the strongest hull in the land, but if there are no sails, then it won't go anywhere. When your mother, aunts, and grandmother are finished weaving the sail, it will look a lot like that one," as he points to the sail of a nearby Vaka. "Strong enough to pull any Vaka through any weather." Ladies and gentlemen, the grandfather has a point. If the hull is how we manage our data and the sail is connectivity, then just like a good sail, strong and woven for the rough weather ahead, can push a hull through rough seas and stormy weather, so too will good communications infrastructure and connectivity transmit data to where it needs to go. I'd like to leave you with that thought as we watch a short video on Pacific Ocean Portal and Ocean Outlooks.
I do use the Ocean Outlooks quite a lot because this is where we get the data of what's coming towards us. So the Ocean Outlook will tell us in advance whether we're expecting a heating event.
It contains sea surface temperature outlook, sea level outlook. It also contains chlorophyll mapping for the last month and also for information on a daily basis. We targeted the fisheries department, tourism, the marine consultants, the ocean-related stakeholders, to be able to give them a bit of guidance and information on the likely chances of coral bleaching event.
So the idea of what we're doing here is long-term coral reef monitoring so that we can see what affects coral reefs, what hurts coral reefs, and what the hopes are for coral reefs in the future.
Using the coral bleaching alert information that is on the bulletin, it helps them to be able to verify the information that they find on the ground.
So it's very important that we can integrate all of this weather data in with what we're seeing in the water. The Ocean Outlook helps to prompt me to get my network moving and say, look, we might be having a bleaching event coming. Let's all go out and look at our coral reefs now before it happens so that we can find out then what the extent of that bleaching event might end up being. These satellite images are very important, but they don't tell us what the sea temperature is like underneath the water. For that, we need temperature recorders that we can put in the water. And again, we have a network of these that we put down on the reef, because coral reefs don't change very quickly. You need 10, 20 years of data before you start to see patterns. So to reflect those patterns into the weather, I need the older bulletins. My temperature loggers stay under the water sometimes for up to 5 years before I can get the data. But the Fiji Met is putting out their reports every month, and that means that I can go back and I can see what happened that year, and I can relate if we've had a coral bleaching, if we've had a drop in coral cover. I can often relate it to what I'm seeing on Fiji Met.
Online Ocean Portal is an open access online tool. It's almost like a one-stop shop for ocean-related information. We gather those information from this online tool before we put it out to the public.
And I think what looks nice about this portal is it's a bringing together of data from different projects, and I see that as a very positive thing. So it looks user-friendly. It looks like something I will be using in the future now I know about it. It's interesting how people can actually apply this data to actually manage some of the pressures that are on the reef and how we can help to improve the corals in Fiji. It's not an automatic thing because you look at the data, you say, okay, that's what's happening, but then what can we do? So when we have a coral bleaching, this is the time to really observe your tambu areas, to restrict your fishing. We can make marine protected areas so that the animals are in proper balance, so that they can create the kind of environment for new corals to grow.
Good luck, everyone. Now, today's event focuses on removing barriers to accessibility of ocean information and highlighting critical elements of accessibility. So far, we've heard our panelists speak on barriers to management and barriers to connectivity. Now, while it's wonderful to have this explosion of data and the communications infrastructure to send it across the region, we need to understand our audiences, their needs, and the best ways to reach them and strengthen communication links up and down the information value chain. To speak on the barriers to understanding, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next panelist, Lisa Williams-Lahari of the Pacific Islands Forum. From the Cook Islands, where she spent the first 33 years of her life, Lisa Williams is joining us from the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat in Suva, where she is a public affairs advisor. A former journalist across government and private sectors, she served in regional comms roles with the Pacific Community in Naumea and the Foreign Fisheries Agency in Honiara. Before returning to regional work, she was freelancing as a media trainer based in New Zealand, most recently with the Radio New Zealand Pacific, where she covered the preparation sessions for the Oceans Decade in SPC. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lisa Williams-Lahari. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Kia ora tātou katoa, Misambula Vinaka. Thank you very much, Amelia, and congratulations to everyone for hosting this wonderful event. Why is it wonderful? I'll explain. I'm actually connected to the ocean through my stomach. I come from the Cook Islands, which is host of the world's best raw fish, or ikamata, as we call it. I've had the blessing of working in the Solomon Islands, home to some of the best chili tuna in the world. And of course, I'm married to Papua New Guinea, the tuna tiger of the Pacific. And with that in mind, I will ask us all to dive in to just a few numbers, some food for thought in these numbers, especially as my journalism career, when it started in 1982, one acronym that's really was it gripped me was UNCLOS. Because I didn't know what it was all about. All I knew it was this wonderful acronym that our leaders kept referring to. It had to be important, it had to be good. And of course, it was all about the law of the sea. Being the younger journalist I was then, we took the releases, we ran with them, but we didn't really ask why. That became clear later across a lifetime, it feels like, of covering the ocean story, of following it to all corners of the Pacific, as we do in this part of the world. So let's start and get back to some numbers that I just want to very quickly raise. August 1971. Leaders from 6 newly independent island nations met in Wellington. They formed what is now the Pacific Islands Forum, 18 member nations and territories, who are a key part of that Blue Pacific continent and the SPC reference to the collective EEZ, the size of Africa. By December 1982, we came then to the UNCLOS, our Convention for the Ocean. It's the world's law of the sea, but it's a law of the sea that was very hard fought for by our forum leaders as they traveled advocating and calling on the rest of the global community to support this concept. By 2015, Pacific leaders were part of those scenes of jubilation in Paris. Why? They were at an annual climate negotiation conference that had dragged on for more than 2 decades. COP at its 21st session finally achieved what Pacific and other island nations of the world had lobbied for those long years. 1.5 degrees global warming, temperature target, and the goal of the Paris Agreement. In 2019, Pacific leaders at their forum meeting in Tuvalu declared climate change to be an existential threat, one of their strongest worded declarations ever on climate change as an issue that has popped up consistently, annually, year after year, never letting go of that message and that call to the world to get it right. The Kainaki Declaration is a very clear 10-point plan asking the world, get back on track, back to the promise of the Paris Agreement. By August 2021, as our leaders marked 50 years of regionalism, they once more turned to the ocean with a milestone declaration. This declaration on preserving maritime zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise is a call to the world and a strong reminder of what can be achieved when our countries stand together. But let me bring us forward to now. In the last 24 hours, the World Meteorological Organization had said there's a 93% chance that by 2026, we will replace 2016 as the warmest year on record. Importantly, they've predicted a 50-50 chance that 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels will be reached. That's a sobering fact. In the next 5 years, we have a 50-50 chance of losing or crossing the line on 1.5 degrees. We're currently in the Ocean's Decade, people. That's why we're here. As communications professionals, as all the partners that are in this space today, the tasking just became more urgent. We argue it's always been urgent, but the latest announcement from the WMO makes it even more so, because the data is now confirming what many of our Pacific communities have been living with for some time. One of the next 5 years is going to be the hottest on record. 1.5 has a 50-50 chance of being reached as well. We know the connection between climate and oceans. Where do we go from here? I look forward to the question and answer talanuas that are coming, and I thank you again for listening.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you very much for being with us this morning. I just wanted to ask you one quick question before we go to Simi, and then we have the question that I'll be asking the both of you to kind of weigh in on. And I guess that question was, you know, as someone who's worked in the media, as someone who's worked in communications, what role do you think communication specialists play to help translate data and science into policy and action?
Yes, that connection between data and science, policy and action, it's one that journalists probably start out with when they leave the newsroom, taking with them their 101 pack. From experience, I would probably just say that you're looking at roles to play, and I'd say, look at some C words. The first one is, of course, connection. Get that role right. Get in touch, not just with each other as comms professionals or as data workers or data miners in the digital domain, but speak as well to communities of scientists, connect with those on the fringes. I especially refer to those that are being the holders of knowledge at the traditional knowledge level, because there has been that faction or that friction. It's always been there, and it's not limited to oceans, between intellectual property of traditional knowledge holders and the science that we get so much publicity, the numbers that we are hearing from when it comes to measuring, monitoring, evaluating, often with the economic agenda in mind. And this is what makes it important too, to also connect at the comms level with youth, with the disabled, with women especially, and also to note the impact end of connecting not just with the policy and the scientists, but connecting with those who will be impacted by these decisions, these policies, and the implementation or the lack thereof. From connection, I would say another role to play is the role of the curious scientist, to stay curious and in spite of what you are receiving, to keep asking questions on the agenda behind data, on where it's coming from, on who's generating it, on how it's being purposed and presented and debated. This is a field of opportunity where in the digital realm, more of our Pacific voices, more of our Pacific priorities can finally rise to the surface of this major debate. I've heard reference to us living in a time of rich information, extensive data, and yes, thanks to portals that are available out there, that's very true. But an accessible ocean is an ocean that's accessible whether you are connected to the digital or not. So it's important for those who are connected to keep saying or to keep thinking of those who are not, who is missing from all these communities that we deal with. And I think curiosity and asking questions outside of the normal script or brief is a big part of that. Importantly too, for our Blue Pacific, I want to urge communicators to stay creative. Creativity links us into something that seems to be almost intuitive for our people, a cultural dimension, touching into indigenous language, to visual metaphors, to that irresistible humor that we get so much of, and the storytelling that we are seeing, especially in today's presentation. That storytelling is riveting. It holds mana, it holds magic, it holds power. Our gift for oratory, our gift for being able to thin slice through the jargon, through the acronyms, and just get to the heart of what really matters with the words that touch our people the most. I think the creative sector, I like to think of it as oranging the blue, is going to be an important partner in holding space for authenticity to help us filter through the science and reach as many people as we can. Finally, an added C word, stay courageous. Don't forget to hold to courage, because often the facts are not what people want to hear. Some of you may be familiar with the Netflix movie, Don't Look Up. When it comes to oceans, I think that there are some real parallels. There are some real urgent realities, as our leaders have often said, that are not being taken into account when action and urgent action is being called for. So hold to courage. You will need that in order to keep the Pacific end of global data on our One Blue Pacific Ocean live and influencing the global conversations and action in this regard. Hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I was riveted by your answer. Thank you so much. There was just a comment in the chat section from your fellow panelist, Ruth, and she said, that's wisdom, Lisa. That's why Dignity Pacific's approach is different. We are guided by our elders and keepers of traditional knowledge, applying them in today's technology and tools. And speaking of traditional knowledge, that's where we're moving to next. From understanding and communication, we move to contributions. Valuable knowledge and data does not only rest with scientists or in academic journals. Recognizing the contributions of traditional and local knowledge strengthens the flow of information in all directions along the value chain and allows for co-creation of more accurate and more meaningful products. To speak to us today on traditional knowledge and the barriers to that contribution, we speak to Mr. Simeone Sevundrendre, the Principal Cultural Officer for the Itauke Affairs Institute of Language and Culture, who manages the Visions Language and Culture units in facilitating programs on the safeguarding of the Itauke language and culture through conduction of research, cultural awareness programs, development of small partnerships with stakeholders on cultural enhancement programs, and activities related to review and awareness of the Itauke language and culture. Bulvanaka Masasimi, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. Over to you.
Belum everyone. I'm sorry, I don't have a blue background because I'm already wearing blue. When I put the background, I became invisible. I'd like to talk to us today about the spiritual significance and understanding of the Wasawasa from the indigenous Itoke lens. I cannot provide facts. I hear the words recognize, and when we talk about recognize, it's a Western intellectual approach. I'd like to change a bit and give a more effective response to that. And I will be telling stories. So my story on the ocean will be a few. I take us to, if you Fiji,
Master Simi, if I could just interrupt
there
you for a
is
moment.
the Lau Islands, the Lau Group Islands, and in that, or Matuku, yes?
Sorry, Master
You
Simi, we're
hear
just turning
me?
your video off, just because there was a slight lag when you were speaking to us. To
Yes,
ensure that there's no lagging during your presentation, we're just going to
yes.
turn your video off for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. This is not unusual. So I'll go back to my storytelling. In the islands of Matuku in Fiji, there is a tradition of another island that sunk close to it. The name of this island was Murotula, the Red Murut. According to Patrick Nunn, geologist, this island sunk about 1000 AD or even earlier. And according to traditions in Talanoa, the people, the warriors who were displaced from this island, they set out and settled in other places of the Pacific. The key words that tell of this migrating tribe are few. There is Vanuapula, island of the Pula bird, and also the word Pula, which means the bird with the lorry, the red feather bird. In the old Fijian language, the color red is kula kula, and also the significance that I understand in Tongan language also the red color is kula, and in the old tradition of the old king of Tonga, when they die, their head faces west because it is believed their spirit travel back to the land of their ancestors and followed the path back to the homeland of Burotu. So they follow what is said in Tonga, Nahala Kipulotu, or what we say here in Fiji, Nasala Burotu. Now, that's one story to show the ocean, to emphasize the key notion in Fijian culture today is vivekani, relationships, kinships. Fast track to another few centuries later, there was this another island in the Lamaiviti group. It's called Vunivilevu. Vunivilevu sank about 1200 AD, and according to local legends, there were two women of princesses of high rank who escaped. One of them was called Andira Rongo, and Andira Rongo's son occupied the island called Moturiki. And he left Moturiki and traveled to Tonga. And there are traditions in Tonga that note his arrival coinciding with the rule of Tuita Tui from Tonga around 1200 AD. This prince established the house called Moturiki, Tui Moturiki, and has been elevated into a deity. The people who are descended from that deity still exists in Muturiki Island. And then come further, a few centuries on, there is this trip, this Talanoa about the king of Tonga visiting Samoa to learn about the canoe racing and canoe craftsmanship. And he brought two Samoan from the island of Manono, Olemaki Kelesa. And once they were in Tonga, because of the Biokani, the relationship, these two craftsmen eventually found their way to Fiji and the island of Lakemba. And on the island of Lakemba, they became the craftsmen and the canoe craftsmen and the house craftsmen of the overlord of the Lau province, the Pineau. And they live today in the island of Kambara and the island of Bulanga. So when we're talking about ocean, when you see the Vamakau, the one that is portrayed in the Moana Disney movie, the front hull is larger than the rear hull to denote that front hull denotes the island of Bulanga, and the back hull, the end, is smaller, denoting the island of Ongea, the island beside Bulanga. And the trigger to the hull represents the island of Kambara, where the craftsmen reside. So that is with regard. So the migration of craftsmen who came and fashioned Vamakau canoes and rua using indigenous vesicri in Fiji. Further on down the line, there is another story of the eldest daughter of Tuitonga, called Sina Itakala. I think, if I correctly can pronounce it, it was the seventh Tuitonga or the eighth Tuitonga, regardless of the number. The Tuitonga was called Telea. Could be Teleka, it could be Fatafei. But this particular Tuitonga had the eldest daughter who was sacred, so sacred, no one in Tonga could marry her. She came to Lakemba, the old dynasty of the Lakemba, the village of Wadi. And on Wadi, she fell in love with a local man called Tambu, Wangambada. Long story short, when the princess went back to Tonga, there was a bun in the oven. When the princess arrived, the Tuitonga always noticed that at sunset, she would always find and look out to the sea towards Fiji. And over time, she began to get thinner and thinner because of sadness and depression. And when the Tui asked her, "What is wrong with you, my princess?" And she said, "My medicine is back in Fiji." So they came back to Lakemba, to Wadi village, and sought this man, and they took him back to Tonga. They got married. From that marriage, there still lives a clan in Tonga called the Ha'afalefisi. From the marriage with a princess from Tonga. Further down the centuries, there is another story here where the old capital of Fiji is, of Oahu, where the World Heritage Site is, of this ancestral warrior called Rakavono. Rakavono and his cousin got lost over the sea, and eventually their canoe came to rest on an island, and they did not know anything about the language or the culture of the island, but the people of that island hosted them, were very friendly. And long story short, there was a princess who was called Awapu. She was considered sacred because she was not let out of the house. She fell in love with one of the two princes, and she communicated this to her family. And the island where the two princes arrived, was known as Marata. In those days, it is called Malaita today in the Solomon Islands. The name of the princess is Nunuanawe. And when Nunuwana communicated her desire to follow one of the princesses to Fiji, the people of the clan, the Rawahu clan, they gave gifts to Nunu Anoe. One gift was they gave her, a gift, a sacred hook used for catching tuna, the high manitai. They also gave a sacred betel nut and leaf, which is chewed to test the strength. This is called the Huaniramo. They also gave the Siripuru, a sacred plant used to physically weaken the enemy. They also gave another plant. They also gave Aria, as a sacred ginger used for fighting. This clan that the woman married into is known as the people of Lovoni in the interior of Ovalau Island in the Lomaiviti group. The traveling on the Wasawasa to ensure building Ryokan. And the spirituality in the indigenous, okay, we all hear of stories of Maui Kitikiti and Maui and the demigods. We have, before Christianity, there was a deity of the ocean. He was called Daudina, the torchbearer. Daudina was said to hang torch when he went around, and he was the patron god of seafarers, of Monendau, or ocean people. If they lose their way in the ocean, they make supplication to the ocean and to the wind, and Daudina will shine the light to show them the path back to safety. In fact, Daudina, he has in the olden days, he had villages which had his temples, which are like embassies. And the travelers from enemy villages, they sought shelter in those temples to be safe from any harm, lest they get, if they are on enmity with whoever it is they're fighting against. And to conclude my story, I'll bring us now to today. In our traditional welcome ceremonies in Fiji, we have a custom for welcoming, and it was all ocean derived. You see, in the olden days, villages by the coast would post sentries on hilltops to continually scan the horizon for the arrival of any canoe. And once they spot a sail, they look out for pennants, massy tassels that are attached to the sail. If they see a massy tassel, that is an indication that that canoe is coming to wage war. The people on the land have the option to also counter with war or follow the highway and broker for peace. When they broker for peace, these are the steps they involve. The people on the land will send emissaries out in a canoe to meet the canoe out in the deep. And there is the first traditional offering of supplication of peace brokering called Luho Nitawake, lowering of the pennants. Once that is lowered, another supplication is presented, and it is called Lavabui Kelekele, heaving another anchor and bridging the distance, coming closer into the calm water. The supplication that's done at sea disarms the spiritual air and aura of the guests. If they come to war, the disarming begins out in the ocean. Once they are in the calm waters, another presentation will be made to them. It is called Bono. Bono is the presentation of a coconut. So whoever presents the coconut to the arriving group, the situation on land will be reflected in the coconut. If it is a green coconut, that means the land is bountiful, everything is good. If the coconut has somewhat matured, it is a polite way of saying, we are willing to host you, but please understand, we are suffering, but we'll still host you. And once the canoe has arrived, the hosts will then dive into the ocean and hold up a whale tooth to formally ask the guest, please disembark, your safety, your security is now assured. That ceremony is called Ngalangalobi, where they actually are swimming and treading water to ask them to come down and that all is well. Remember, this was during pre-Christian days when we were represented incorrectly to be always savage and warlike. On the contrary, the ocean was where we brokered our peace highway through these ceremonies. And once the guests arrived on land, because they travel over the sea, their costumes, their attire was drenched, and they would be given fresh clothes, fresh tapa, fresh vow, whatever it is that was the dam or soil, it is replaced. And that ceremony is called Vaka Moana, presentation of dried clothing. Mind you, they still have not known each other. Once they have changed, then the final presentation is made. It is the mixing of the kava sebu. This is the green plant. Now, from the ocean where the pennants were lowered, the supplications that were submitted, the spiritual aura warfare that was with the guests is disarmed. The proximity is brought closer when they do the heaving in of the anchor, and then clothing them in dry clothes. The last bastion to be supplicated, to be appealed to is their mind and their body. The anxiety, the stresses, the cover presentation, the strong libation of the green cover mix. One gulp, it sends this immense sense of relaxation on the mind and the body of the guests. So when we are talking about a ceremony, from the ocean derived our peace highway, which we now call the Vingarabi Vavanua, where the spirit, the emotion, the distance proximity, the mind, and the body, all those levels are addressed to acknowledge kinship, to build kinship, to build alliances. And I'd like to read out a chant of a kava chant. You know, you may have seen presentations of kava in Fiji, and as the kava is being presented to for whoever the chief guest to drink, the chant is always in old language. I have taken the time to translate some of those from, there are many chants. This particular chant that I'll talk about was gifted to the Dolce Sounds Dulali group by a traditional choreographer and elder from the Nailango Wai clan in Nakelo, Tailevu province. It is special as the vision and sounds of the chant extol the travels of Pacifica King over the Wasawasa into Fiji. The opening lines is sung by a lone voice, Avuso Niua Kenaiuhu, gracefully aloft the wave crest. This refers to a visitor who has traveled over the sea and is keenly anticipated on land with a welcome, yearning, plaintive voice, extolling one who is gracefully perched aloft the crest of the waves. The consequent lines add other voices which sing, Enduanawanga etau katumbu, nongovulani endalaniwai. A canoe rises and falls, my esteemed guest aloft the sea. Wakuru naua ndalai nasilai. The surf pounds at the Nasilai Reef entrance. Sail o aladani wanga uredarawa. Sail ho, a canoe I behold. Aladani wanga elomaniwasa. A canoe sail in the ocean. Nongo wasawasa, aladani wanga. My ocean, a canoe sail. Soko volimai turangandokai, an honored guest comes sailing. Erasadruma Nailangawai. They now enter into Nailangawai, the entrance. Erasavura, Erasavura, Erasavura. They are emerging. They are emerging. they have emerged. That is my brief talanoa to share with us the spiritual and cultural meaning of the Wasa Ocean from the Tokay lens in terms of creating and affirming relationships obiwakani. Nawali.
Asa, thank you so much for your valuable contributions. It is sincerely appreciated. Litia Nganovo had a comment in the chat section that said, you brought back memories of my grandmother telling that very same story of Tua Tambu and Princess Sinu Malo. And I agree, Litia. For a moment there, I was taken back to my childhood listening to my grandfather telling us our legends as we were growing up. And Andrew Hunt commented in the chat that I know what I'll be doing this weekend. Amazing take, Simi. Going to take a closer look at the shape of the hulls of canoes now. I agree. I think Moana is going to be a movie I'll be rewatching this weekend. Now we're going to move ahead with our program, but please remember that we'll be hearing from our panelists again right before the end of today's event. So please, we want to hear from you, your observations, your comments, and your questions. Please feel free to place them in the chat, and we'll include them as our program progresses. But with that being said, thank you both Lisa and Simi for not only your contribution to the event today, but your contribution to the region with the work that you do. It is sincerely appreciated, and we can't wait to hear from the both of you more a little later on. Now, before we move forward, we want to hear from you via Slido. Now, our first question is, what ocean information on a virtual platform would be useful to you in your work or personal life?
How do you do?
Now, if you're if you see the screen, your screen will be blue at the moment, and you have a QR code in the left-hand corner. Please feel free to scan that code so that you can and just follow the prompt. Remember that the code is Access Ocean. And the question again is, what ocean information on a virtual platform would be useful to you in your work or personal life? We have some answers coming in. Seafloor data, cultural dimensions of the ocean, FAD locations, impact reporting. Please feel free to contribute. We would love to hear what you have to say. We have more answers coming in, amazing facts, fisheries information, shoreline change detection, wave height data, visibility, connections to land and sea, all very, very interesting. Our second question, in your opinion, what are the gaps in accessible ocean data right now? Now, again, remember that if you're joining us from your laptop or from your phone, just type in slido.com. You can also scan the QR code. When you're asked what the access code is Access Ocean. And the question again, in your opinion, what are the gaps in accessible ocean data right now? I think that was an interesting one, just not knowing where to find the right information. Data sharing restrictions, I know that was something that the CEO shared with us a little earlier on. A centralized repository of data, specific info that is up to date. Sharing restrictions, again, I think that was something that CEO had touched on a little earlier on during his presentation. central location for ocean models and forecasts. Lack of observation equipment in the ocean, one-stop shop for ocean data. Please feel free to continue to contribute to this Slido. Now, we're going to leave the Slido for a moment, and we're going to go back to building our virtual Vaka. Now, if I may, I'd like to take you back to the beach. Back to the beach of white sand and blue clear water, where grandfather works steadily on the hull of a Vaka while his grandchildren sit near him as he works in the afternoon light. Back to where an inquisitive child draws in the sand as he mentally places all of the information his grandfather has given him in a straight line, lining them up in his mind the way you would with building blocks. Grandfather, without waiting for him to respond, he asks, "What else do you need for a strong Vaka?" Without breaking his rhythm on the hull of the Vaka, the grandfather thinks for a moment and replies, "There are two very important things. The first is the steering oar. Not only is this important because it steers the Vaka, but it also stops the Vaka from being pushed sideways by the wind and the swell of the sea. When plunged deep into the water, it gives the boat greater stability and control while moving forward." And the second, grandfather? The second is what some people might say is the most important. It is the people. A boat without people is just a boat, but a boat with people in a new land is culture and knowledge. It is passing on the secrets of the sea and tide. It is knowing when to fish and when to plant. Ladies and gentlemen, just as the grandfather shared with his grandchild the purpose of the steering oar and the people on board a Vaka, the same can be said for communication and contribution. Communication is the oar that steadies us, that places everyone from grassroots level stakeholders to policymakers in government to NGOs on an even keel. The deeper our oar, the deeper our understanding and communication, the better stability and control we have when moving forward. And lastly, the people on board the Vaka. It is the people on board the Vaka that carry the hopes and dreams, custom and cultures, traditions and knowledge that enrich and strengthen the flow of information in all directions. Something that is real today as it was long ago. And I would like to leave you with that image for now. The image of a grandfather and a grandchild on the beach in the afternoon sunlight. It could be a beach in Fiji, it could be a beach in Papua New Guinea, or the Solomon Islands. The beach is where we are right now, ladies and gentlemen, and the Vaka is what will take us to where we need to go. I ask that you keep that image in your mind for now, because we'll come back to it later on. But first, here's a short video on maritime boundaries data.
Marae Moana is a multiple-use marine protected area, or other people refer to it as a whole domain approach to ocean governance. And it's important to the Cook Islands, obviously, because we have one of the largest exclusive economic zones in the Pacific. It's such a massive, expansive ocean, 2 million square kilometres. Understanding how Marae Moana works, the seasons, currents, all that sort of thing is the bit difficult part. Well, obviously boundaries are very important, and so the work that's currently being done has helped to show the Cook Islands government and the people of the Cook Islands, where our access areas are. More importantly, what we are stewards of.
It's really important to have your areas mapped out and formally established. What follows is establishing your rights in those areas. Having those clearly defined zones allows us to constrain fishing effort. It helps us to manage fisheries activities or any other potential commercial activities, including seabed mining. It's important to have the Cook Islands area mapped out. because we want to be able to take advantage of the rights that are associated with those zones.
Deep sea minerals is a very important topic, particularly now that they're starting to do exploration. They're in the exploration phase, I believe, is 5 years, and the companies who've been given those tenders will again provide the Cook Islands with some much needed information. So the more data and the more research that can be done, particularly in our waters where we have depths of up to 6,000 meters, and there's not a lot known about what happens down there.
With climate change and sea level rise, having those zones mapped out is important to protect us from the future, and that includes loss of base points. So another reason why we need to have that work done is in case of loss of base points. We, like many other Pacific Island countries, take the position that once established, those lines and those areas are permanent.
I think the digital platforms that are out there now really need to be pushed into schools and the education sector. It's all right that government agencies get to see these things, but we really need the next generation of scientists and fisheries officers and fishermen themselves to know exactly what's out there. If you actually believe you own something or you're stewards of something, you're responsible for that thing, there's more interest, more community interest, more government interest. On a traditional side of things, we have, our Vaka, we have our traditional voyaging guys that know all this information, have all this information stored, and to be able to use that information as well and pair it up with the scientific data is going to be amazing, I believe. I think it's going to unlock or unfold a whole lot of things that we all should know about the ocean.
Vinaka. Now, from Maritime Boundaries data, we move to the Pacific Maritime Boundaries Dashboard. This dashboard is a regional platform for sharing progress and relevant information on Pacific Island maritime boundaries and zones. The information that you will see displayed has been prepared and deposited with the United Nations by Pacific Island countries and territories with support from the Pacific Maritime Boundaries Consortium of Partners and through the Pacific Maritime Boundaries Program. To demonstrate the Pacific Maritime Boundaries Dashboard on the Pacific Data Hub, it is my pleasure to welcome Malakai Vakatauwale, a Maritime Boundaries Advisor of the Ocean Management and Literacy Team at the Geoscience Energy and Maritime Division of the Pacific Community based in Suva. Buvanaka Malakai.
Everyone. Please allow me to share a few slides before I will show a live demonstration of the dashboard. The Maritime Boundaries Dashboard was developed to provide an accessible and an interactive information of the maritime boundaries information in the Pacific. It also acts as an advocacy tool, which reflects what is deposited with the United Nations Division on the Law of the Sea, or the UN Dwellers. And I'm glad that Lisa Williams mentioned UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. These are the rules and regulations that that governs our technical and scientific work here at SPC. Yeah, the second slide. Prior to the development of the interactive dashboard, the team normally maps out this traffic light, what we call a traffic light map, showing the treaties are signed, those that are yet to be signed, and those that are in progress in traffic light color. We also show the information of treaties in one document. So what we wanted to show was on a platform, that shows the number of treaties that has been signed. There is 35 out of 48. The 7 treaties that remains to be signed, 13 shared boundaries, and 5 high seas limits that yet to be signed. So we worked very closely with the Pacific Data Hub team in Umea, and thanks to their very helpful effort, we were able to develop an interactive dashboard for the Pacific region. Just to show you access, one can log into Google Earth and type in the Pacific Data Hub, or actually type the HTTP that is on the screen. On the Pacific Data Hub map, you will notice there is a dashboard called the PIC's Maritime Boundaries Dashboard. On the dashboard, basically there are 2 sets of information. One is the landing page, which shows the general overview of the regional maritime boundaries information, and the other is the individual countries' maritime boundaries information and update. Just for the technical people that we work in with the region, one, for example, the foreign fisheries agencies, they normally request us to share online these data sets, or these technical data sets, for their vessel monitoring system. So what we also have on the dashboard is the link to these technical data sets for the foreign fisheries agencies vessel monitoring system, or for monitoring, controlling, and surveillance of fishing vessels in the region. Let me please take you to the dashboard. There is this dashboard where you can just find the maritime boundaries dashboard. One can just open that link. It will show you a general information of maritime boundaries, limits, and updates for the region. For this region, you will notice that one can just click, say, for example, the EEZ of FSM, Federated States of Micronesia. You will have information on the area, number of treaties, and their extended continental shelf areas that they are claiming. And at the bottom are the data sets, the technical data sets that technical staff in country or anywhere in the region or in the world would like to download. So once that is done, you can also view the information of treaty lines. Say, for example, I've clicked the treaty line between Marshall Islands and Federated States of Micronesia. You notice that is colored green, which is signed, and the E is signed, and it has been entered into force. There are other colors in this dashboard, which shows the progress of treaty information in the region. As we go down, you will see the pathways and the progress in the region, in particular pathways to treaty, as well as the extended continental shelf. At the bottom of the page, of the first page, you will see the flags of the 14 member states that we work on. I will try to open one information of 14 member states. Say, for example, Cook Islands. One can just access Cook Islands information page. You will have information of their national legislations, their territorial seas, maritime zones, extended continental shelf, and there is a visualization of their EEZ area. You will notice if someone clicks the extended continental shelf, it shows the name of the extended continental shelf, Manihika Plateau, whether it is a joint submission or not, and year that has it been submitted to the Commission, and also the pathways to the pathways or the progress as per country. We'll notice that Cook Islands, for example, has submitted or has done all their treaties and has submitted their maritime zones and limits to the United Nations Convention on UN Dwellers. Right at the bottom, one technical officer can access the datasets or the shape files, the GIS files that they can use for their monitoring and surveillance. And this is on this page, you will see a metadata, information of these datasets, the date when it was versioned, as well as the type of datasets that are in there. So that's basically what is on the dashboard, and we hope to also develop this dashboard to show other maritime boundaries information like MPAs and other related information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malakai. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I know that it's not just helping us in Fiji, but it's helping everyone around the region. Now, this is the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. Data collectors and managers are not doing their job if they're not actively invested in how information is used to inform decisions, how to bridge the science policy gap between knowledge and action. Now, to share with us the barriers to application, we welcome Mr. Brendan Pasisi, the manager for the Niue Ocean-wide project under the public-private partnership between the government of Niue and local NGO Tofia Niue. He is also the director of his own private fishing charter and marine services business, is the current president of the Niue Island Fishing Association, and is a board member for the Niue Tourism Authority. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Brendan Pasisi.
Yes, kalapalahia to everybody, and thank you, Amelia. Conscious of the time, I will try to be as quick as possible and do my best to link back to the question and the theme that we're working on today. And to do that, I'm just going to share a little bit of our experience here under the Niue Ocean-wide project. Just up front, I'd like to just acknowledge the fact that after a long period of working for the Niue government, I now work for a small NGO called Tofia Niue, which is Niue's Ocean, the translation. And I'm privileged to manage that under a public-private partnership with the government of Niue. And also just to acknowledge that the work that we've been able to achieve over the last 5 to 6 years is through partnership with many other contributors to this, but some that I'd like to acknowledge is Oceans 5, National Geographic Pristine Seas, the Blue Nature Alliance, the regional crop agencies like SPC, and I'll talk to that soon, LISPA and many others, and in particular the Ridge to Reef project as well has been a great partner with us in this. So I guess just to link back to the importance of information and the data collection, we've heard a lot about that today. The project itself, as you can see there, the goal is really the holistic sustainable development and management of our ocean and its resources to improve the livelihoods of Niueans now and into the future. And we've heard how important it is for the stakeholders and our people, communities, that what we do and the science and the data that we use ultimately benefits them and impacts their lives and protection of the ocean environment and resources in a positive way. I guess there are 3 main objectives of the project outlined there, and I'm going to focus mainly on the first one, which is the establishment of our Marine Spatial Management Plan for Niue. Inclusive within that is the large-scale marine protected area and the boundaries that have been set up around that, and I've been working very closely with Malakai. I was surprised that he didn't put up our example, but I'll be sure to come in and visit him in that regard to see how that dashboard is representing Niue. The compliance is already established. And then I will just touch a little bit on the increased returns to sustainable financing mechanism in the importance of how data and data management in a timely manner will support Niue going forward. So I think just to begin with, obviously to underpin any decision by any country or government to close off a large portion of their ocean real estate, it's not just done off a gut feeling. And so we actually had to utilize, and the importance of the data required that is held both with SPC, FFA, and other databases we had to tap into, including the effort levels, historic effort levels and fishing activity throughout Niue's exclusive economic zone, the tracking of vessels through the vessel monitoring system, AIS, and other things, research that had been done over many years, sporadically looking at deep sea mineral exploration, but also linking that as well to tourist statistics over time and the trends that we were seeing progressing, and also linking that to the carrying capacity of our environment. So a lot of that information had to feed into what was undertaken as a cost benefit. We undertook a cost benefit analysis to be able to convince the government that to do this close off the large scale marine protected area, 40% of Niue's EEZ, was something that was of benefit to Niue, and that lost opportunities within that area could be made up through other more sustainable means, and in Niue's case, ecotourism and sustainable tourism. Before, of course, you can do any of this, you need to know what you have and what the status of those resources and the ocean environment looks like. And I should have said up front, we've had a number of surveys done over a long period of time, but they were just snapshots in time. And so our partner, National Geographic Pristine Seas, we undertook first the most comprehensive marine survey over a 2-week period, including more than 20 different institutions, both around Niue, its pelagic waters, as well as offshore at Beveridge Reef, which you can see here in the little diagram at the bottom there. And from that, we were able to get a decision by the government to go down this track. And of course, we had to take that to our people. So through communication, we were able to go out and we documented that survey, and we took it back to our people here on the island and showed them what the science entailed in generating that information. And you can see some of the statistics there on the right-hand side of your screen that were generated out of that survey. You can see the map of Niue's EEZ and some of the boundaries there. We now have 5 zones identified within our marine spatial management planning framework. And you will have heard that Niue very recently announced during the week of our Oceans Conference in Palau that Niue had put in place the marine spatial plan through the Nukutulea multiple use marine park regulations. So all those zones now have been promulgated into law, and have been working closely with Malakai and his team to ensure that those boundaries are available, and we'll look to make sure that those are, if not already on the dashboard, that they do find their way there very shortly. So that's a very hot off the press in terms of developing that. SPC database that's been referred to earlier in the conference is one that we rely on very heavily. The journey to get to where we are now, I have to fast forward this quite quickly given the time, but we've had more than 30 consultations and briefings with our village communities, with cabinet ministers, with government agencies. It's a lot of work, and although 5 years sounds like a long time, it's actually gone very quickly, and we've found that as soon as you complete one step, there's need to move on rapidly to the next step and the next stage. And at all levels, we've communicated to people, but our people really and the stakeholders need to see in a small place like here change that is quick enough to maintain their interest and to build their confidence that what we are providing will actually benefit them in the long run. I guess as well, just to say that the near shore around Niue, you can see in the small blowout there of 0 to 3 nautical miles adjacent to the island. That's the most challenging part because it's where all of the small 14 village communities all have rights and of access to those different fisheries, those different ocean spaces, as well as us trying to fit all the other potential users and stakeholders from small-scale artisanal fishing to visiting tourists and other visitors to the island. So that's the challenge that we are working on now. What does the future look like for us going forward? I think we're trying to set up a trust and some innovative ways of capitalizing that. One of those is an ocean conservation credit. And you can see here in the slide, these are changing as we finalize this, but really just to give you some indication of the level of data and information that we need in order to ensure we can report back. So some of these indicators here, you can see there's a wide range. We are developing them across those different drivers, whether it's ecological, climate change, socioeconomic, spatial, or protection. And so we will be, we are currently working on those, but it's an area where we're building capacity locally. We're reaching out to the regional agencies to assist us where we can with that. If I could just ask you to back up on the slides a little bit. Again, 1, 2 more. Sorry, so I just wanted to show here an example of how some of the importance of data and information. So you can see here, and I acknowledge IUCN and the McBio project for this. These are the deep water bioregions, which came on board later after we had started. But you can see this was the indicative zone to be closed as a large-scale marine protected area. And if you move to the next slide, you can see how we moved the location of the large-scale marine protected area to ensure that Niue has a small portion of all 6 bioregions represented in our large-scale marine protected area. So just wanted to use that as an example of where the importance of data and information really is critical to helping managers and decision makers on this sort of work. So you can go forward on the slides. So I'll probably just leave it there at that slide, and just reinforcing the importance of the kinds of data sets that will support Niue and I'm sure many others as we go forward and try to track the effectiveness of the actions that we put in place, the management, and help guide the management decisions that are required as we go forward to make sure that what we're doing both for our country, our people, but also the region and the global community adds value and is efficient and as effective as possible. So I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being with us today, Brendan. We appreciate how busy you are, and we're grateful that you took time out of your busy schedule to share your knowledge with us. And don't worry, I've passed your message on to Mala, and he's aware that you and he will be having a very short conversation after this. I guess one of the questions I kind of wanted to ask you was, you shared with us your journey in establishing Niue's 100% managed multiple use marine park. But I guess one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, what was it like for you personally?
Well, I failed to mention up front, I'm a fourth generation fisherman, born and bred here in Niue. And the ocean is the reason that I still reside here in Niue. We have, my mother always complained that I spent more time in and underwater than I did on the land. Unfortunately, I'm sort of chained to the desk more often these days. But yeah, I think the importance of the ocean to us is, it can't be understated. It's something that have a passion for, and so yeah, for the foreseeable future at least, contributing back something that has helped many people and myself over my lifetime and our family is something that I take great enjoyment in doing. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Brendan. I know there's a few of us sitting here who probably had that same kind of being chastised by our mothers for spending too much time out at sea. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the close of our panel discussions for today's event. Now, to all of our panelists that took time out to be with us, we thank you and know that we are behind you 100% in the work that you do and the time that you regularly sacrifice. I'd now like to invite you all to participate in our final Slido. Now, following the discussion, which of the following elements of an accessible ocean resonated most with you? And again, you're allowed to select up to 3. Is it data gathering and data management? Connectivity in terms of internet, mobile phones, comms infrastructure? Is it tailored communications and outreach? Or collaborative contribution to knowledge generation? Or maybe it's the application of data and knowledge to policy and action? Now, again, don't forget to access the Slido platform. You can use your mobile phone or your web browser. Simply enter slido.com in the search bar of your preferred web browser. And if you're using your phone, you can also scan the QR code on the screen. A white bar will appear across the screen saying enter code here. If you're on a computer, you'll see a blue box saying joining as a participant, enter code here, and the event code for today's lab is Access Ocean.
It's sort of showing, data gathering came out on top the first time, but now we're seeing application coming out on top and collaborative contribution.
Now we see that application of data and knowledge to policy and action is kind of coming out at the beginning. And if I'm not mistaken, it was data gathering and data management that was actually at the top of the poll when we first asked these questions at the first Slido.
Collaborative contribution is at the top.
Collaborative contribution to knowledge generation is now at the top, and I think one of the people who've been kind of working on making sure that this event was a success just mentioned that it's very reflective of everything that we kind of shared today, and I think she's absolutely right. Now we're going to move on to our second Slido question, and that is, what word comes to your mind when thinking of our journey today? Now, again, you can always use your phone to scan the QR code that's on the screen. And don't forget that the event code for today's lab is Access Ocean. We have Blue Pacific, we have Vaka, we have partnerships, inspiring, sharing, circular. I think that kind of resonates with me as well. Everything we do is full circle. What we might be doing right now can affect someone else, and the information and what they do comes back to us, and it just goes full circle. Together we'll get there. Connections, innovation, the future, data, access, of course. A safe and accessible ocean. I agree. Vewakani, very inspiring. Wasa wasa, motivational partnerships. Fishalicious, that is a word that I have never heard before, but yes. I think that's less office, more time on the ground. I think that's what that's supposed to be. I think Brandon would agree with you on that one. And responsible stewardship. Thank you so much to everyone who participated in our final Slido question this afternoon. Now, before we conclude today's event, I'd like to take you back to the beach where a group of children are watching as their elder works on a vaka and listening as he passes on his knowledge. As the afternoon sun slowly begins its descent, we watch as just over the horizon, one and then two, and then many vakas appear. Slowly making their way to the shore, their sails taunting the salty wind. As they get nearer, men and women flock to the shore with baskets of root crops, food, and animals. Sensing their excitement, the grandfather asks them, "What else do you think is important for a vaka to get where it needs to go?" The children mull it over and whisper amongst themselves. After trying and failing to give him the correct answer, the grandfather says, "It is the ocean. The ocean is the last thing that a vaka needs to sail." If a vaka is management, connectivity, understanding, and contribution, then the ocean is taking us where we need to go when combined and applied to get where we need to be. I would like to leave you with these words from the Utonialo. We as Pacific voyagers are on a journey, sailing to an island in the future and navigating by the values of our ancestral past. Our ancestors understood that the health of the ocean reflects the health of the people. When we truly acknowledge this insight, when we are aware of the extensive threats of the ocean, and when we care about the future of our children, the only logical step is to create a new vision, a sustainable sail plan based on values of interconnectedness, respect, and stewardship. You, ladies and gentlemen, are as close to ocean warriors as we can get. If the tools we discussed today is the vaka and the ocean is the application, then it is up to you to create a sustainable sail plan that will take us to where we need to go. While we may have been on board a virtual vaka today, it is the vaka that is a physical manifestation of the connection between people, land, and the sea. With that, I'd like to invite the head of the Pacific Community for Ocean Science, Jerome, to wrap up today's events and provide the closing remarks. Vinaka.
Thank you, Amelia. And thank you to all the panelists as well. And Amelia, again, thank you for the storytelling. And please allow me to take you once again to the beach. Now that the grandfather has shown the child the hull, the sail, the oar of the vaka, and all the elements about the ocean that it means, the child also needs to learn how to find his way on that ocean. And as you know, traditional wayfinding was a precious knowledge in the Pacific, as it allowed the canoes to cross large ocean expanses between groups of islands. And that knowledge was passed on from generation to generation at the risk of being lost forever. And personally, I was very humbled and lucky to be the witness of the rescue of one such knowledge back when I was a young scientist, and it was in the Marshall Islands. One of the last navigators there, who was using swell patterns to find his way between islands, was lamenting because no child was actually interested in his teaching, and he feared his knowledge would be lost. So he got in touch with scientists at the University of Hawaii, both in human science and in ocean science. And we proceeded to record his technique, to understand his knowledge, and to generate and publish the information about it. That knowledge that was passed orally from generation to generation was now available to anyone willing to open a book. So really that opening up of knowledge and information for everyone to see and understand was the key theme of today's event. Make information, ocean information, accessible. Information is power and is key to progress. And the more accessible this information is, the more powerful this information and the more power that information gets. So let's all try to collectively achieve what we preach. And on those words, thank you everyone. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the audience. Have a good day and au revoir.